Hello, everybody. Thought it was time once again to record a quick video, so here it is. In response to the recent controversy regarding censorship of social media, I made this meme. I took a picture of Nazis burning books, and I said, "Censoring social media to protect people from dangerous ideas in the name of public safety and national security." Now, as you can imagine, this meme sparks a lot of debate, and part of it is just people saying, well, this isn't like that because, we don't want to censor good speech. We want to censor bad speech. Or it's not censorship because these are private companies that are doing this, and private companies are allowed to do whatever they want. I've given some examples of how that doesn't go so well, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But the primary reason why I did this is that I don't think that people on the left realize that just because they're currently in power, they can't lose sight of the reason why the rights that we have as human beings exist. And that's kind of what this is about. Censorship is great as long as you're the one in charge, as long as you're the one who gets to decide what is and is not objectionable material. And because we're in charge at the moment, people on the left are really happy with the idea that now they'll be able to shut up everybody who doesn't, believe like they do. And so, I want to go over a couple of things here, but the biggest thing here, I would say, let me just use this conversation I had here on Facebook on a group that calls "It Gives Citation for Its Claim or It Gets the Hose Again," which is another debate group that is largely left-leaning, but it tries to frame itself as this is a place where we're going to have meaningful debates and give citations and such. And for the most part, when I posted this meme there in response to a parallel that somebody else put up of the Nazi rise to power and such, I posted the meme that I just showed you, which, by the way, is on the Charlie Veitch social network. Charlie Veitch, the activist from the Love Police, has his own social network free of censorship. You guys should check it out. You'll find me over there as well. I didn't leave Facebook or Twitter, but I am looking for other outlets as well. So anyway, let me read some of this conversation to you. "At this point, you have to be careful about what you defend. Trump deserves his Twitter ban. That doesn't mean people don't realize how bad it is that Zuckerberg had to explain the internet to Congress. You can't compare Trump losing Twitter to the book burnings. We are not losing great, insightful literature. They are not comparable. They are not comparable situations, and it made you seem foolish." Because she defines it as not great, insightful literature. But I would also say that I didn't actually base my entire argument about Trump at all. This really doesn't have anything to do with it. What motivated me to get involved in this was when they weren't satisfied with just banning people from Twitter and Facebook. They want to take down entire social media platforms. It's not enough for them to create a censorship system on their own platforms. They need to also go shut down Parler, and then, and not just take it off of Google app. Like, they literally are going to go to Amazon to just remove it. And I think they actually did today because Parler is down. And for those of you who don't know what Parler is, it's another social media app that is frequented by conservatives, but you don't have to be a conservative to use it. I had a Parler account just so I could communicate with certain people. But anyway, so this is what I responded to her with. I said, "I have clarified this a few times, but I am not a fan of Trump. I have just been involved in activism long enough to have been on both sides of this situation. In 2008, when the Patriot Act was passed, we were concerned about the internet as a whole being shut off. A candidate like Bernie Sanders would have never gotten into even the second debate in 2008. They would have shadow banned him from the media, just as they did to Mike Gravel, Dennis Kucinich, and Ron Paul on the other side of the aisle. Anyone who was anti-Bush or anti-war simply ceased to exist. George Bush Jr. literally said it should be illegal to say negative things about your president. There is a can of worms being opened, and I don't think people are thinking it through. It's not Trump being banned from Twitter that really bothers me. It's that we are now not stopping there. We are going to try to shut down even the alternate platforms, or any platform that is more uncensored. If they had more uncensored. If they had just left it at banning people from Twitter and Facebook, I would be concerned, but not enough to be going through all this trouble. It's when they say they are going to shut down Parler and Gab for not also going along with this, going so far as to even remove their ability to be hosted on the internet, that is too much. We are in charge at the moment, and it's easy to fall into this trap, but ask yourself, for example, how you would feel if, say, Mitch McConnell got to determine who was allowed to post on social media. This person was one of the only people on this forum who actually tried to have a decent conversation with me. The rest of people did what I call like laugh spam, where they just randomly click laugh, remote laugh-like reactions to everything you say. Don't even try to engage in any kind of meaningful conversation. They threw a lot of memes and personal attacks at me and such because they didn't really have a solid argument. But this person is trying to argue with me, but in so doing, she kind of proves my point, and we'll get to that now. So she goes, Bernie didn't incite a violent insurrection to overturn the will of the people. Look at the context of the issue and enough of these slippery slope arguments. They are unbecoming. And then I said, again, I'm not talking about Trump. Banning entire social media outlets from functioning because they won't adhere to your censorship policies is what is at issue. And then she says, you believe Parler deserves a platform? I don't. They can create their own if they can find someone who wants it badly enough to fund it. They can write and read a book, too, if they want their message out there. Heck, they can write letters. They aren't powerless. And then I said, Bernie not inciting an insurrection is not really my point. Candidates used to be censored wholesale. They still did things to try and marginalize Bernie, but in 2008 he would have simply ceased to exist in the common parlance. The point is to understand that censorship is only your friend if you happen to be in charge. Victoria Rose says to me, okay, but this has nothing to do with Bernie. This has to do with them not being allowed to yell bomb at the airport. They use that one a lot too, but that's not what anybody did. This is not free speech. This is threatening other people. There are consequences for speech to incite violence. I've been getting this one a lot, which is going to bring me to my next segue here. But let me first go on a little bit further into this conversation. I said, there has been a growing movement to suggest that anyone who does not agree with us 100% on all issues should be completely canceled. The list of things that can get one canceled or censored is growing and gets more and more vague and inconsistent in its application. So should we censor all fascists? Okay. I know people who think even moderate Republicans are fascists. I know people who think being opposed to rioting and looting is racist in of itself. This is why you don't censor speech. Human beings cannot be trusted with this tool. It will always backfire. So she says, no, you look at the context of the situation and ask if the speech causes harm to another individual. What list of things you can't say? You shouldn't be allowed to incite violence, and I think Trump should have been taken down years ago, and that a site like Parler should never have been given a platform to begin with. So I said, so should Antifa and BLM activists who do, and no, not all of them do, incite violence have the same thing done to them? Or is this only the violence perpetrated by people we disagree with? So she basically said, let the lunatics go back to writing manifestos and journals alone instead of online, together, and then stop arguing to enable a site that encourages them to go LARP their dystopian fiction novel. Insane. And I said, are you going to answer the question? This is in regards to the BLM Antifa question. And then she goes on to say, no one should be allowed to incite violence, whatever that violence is. And then I said, okay, so how many degrees of separation are sufficient? Should, say, all Trump supporters be banned from social media? And she says, if they prove themselves to be violent and capable of harming others, they should get a timeout and a visit from the FBI. So I went ahead and grabbed 3 videos that I've used frequently to try to help people understand why this is a problem. And this one would probably be one of my personal favorites so far as the realm of the infamous. You may remember it from my video about the murder of Michael Reinhold, but rather the murder of a Patriot Prayer member by Michael Reinhold. And this was that night after he walked up and shot a man in the street and killed him.
You're not angry, you're not paying attention. If you're not angry, you're not with me. Everybody needs to realize what's going on in these streets. Our community can hold its own without the police. We can take out the trash on our own. I am not sad that a fucking fascist died tonight. And tonight, I just got word. The person who died was a Patriot Prayer person. He was a fucking Nazi. Our community held its own and took out the trash. I am not going to shed any tears over a Nazi.
So that last clip was the actual murder, and I did a whole video specifically about that topic. But again, that's a woman who openly cheered and encouraged other people to cheer that a member of Antifa murdered a man in the street who wasn't, at that moment anyway, doing anything to anybody. So that's incitement of violence. In fact, I would say that her bullshit, cheering and I'm glad that this person died and all that, is probably worse than anything I've heard anybody on the right or the left say this whole last year. But here's some more examples of inciting violence. This is a Black Lives Matter protest, but it looks an awful lot like a group of Nazi brown shirts.
If you don't give us our shit, if you don't give us our shit, shut shit down.
We're shutting the party down. Nobody's gonna touch you. We're shutting your party down. Calm down. Calm down.
That was actually the moment, I might add, when I finally said that I could not in any way support Black Lives Matter anymore. While I do recognize that it's only certain groups that engage in this sort of behavior, there's never anything effective so far as opposing the behavior. They don't clean house. They don't call anybody out for doing stuff like that. And if people are concerned about inciting violence and insurrection, let's take a look at what happens when a group of Antifa decide that they're going to attempt to murder about a half dozen cops with a Molotov cocktail. So again, okay, so is it acceptable then that anybody who incites violence should be banned from social media? If that's really how people feel, why hasn't anybody been calling for that all year? Because Black Lives Matter activists and Antifa activists have both commonly said that peaceful protests don't work. We have to do this violent stuff because peaceful doesn't work. And I actually forgot to pull it up. I was planning on pulling it up, but there's a video of them telling somebody that asking them to to do peaceful protests makes somebody a white supremacist. If you ask someone else to protest peacefully, then you are a white supremacist. So this is the problem: is that the definition of who is and is not a Nazi, the definition of who is and is not a fascist, the definition of who is and is not a racist has become entirely too loose. This is why I compared it to inquisitions and witch hunts, because there's signs of the devil under every rock. And I think what it really amounts to is that it's not even that they're really concerned about anybody causing violence, because that's been going on all year. It's only anybody inciting violence against the people that they call their allies. This isn't about opposing violence in general. I know I look forward to be wrong, but the problem is that they get really quiet and awkward when I say this, or what they'll say is, well, that's different because that's violence in the name of fighting police brutality. Okay, so it's either violence is enough of a reason for you to be banned from Twitter, or it's not. You don't get to pick and choose which violence is okay. So let me go on with this conversation. She says, I think Twitter was too lenient and that he should have lost his platform after spreading COVID misinformation. And I said, again, not really talking about Trump. You were saying that, for example, everyone on Parler should not be allowed to have a platform? Why? There were plenty of people on Parler who didn't incite violence, or don't. And then she said, and do those people still have Facebook? If they don't violate the playground rules, then they can have any conversation they want. Parler is being punished by their platforms, the app stores, because they don't want to sell their product. You can't force a store to sell the Nazi flag, and you can't force Apple to sell Parler. And so I said, so Parler is the Nazi flag? And she goes, yup. And I said, you're kind of demonstrating my point, so please elaborate. How is Parler the Nazi flag? And I said, or rather she said, she was actually talking to somebody else there that I later blocked, but anyway, you're kind of defending Nazis having a platform to spew their Nazi propaganda and then comparing it to the burning of books. So I said, no. What Nazis am I defending? Well, let's back up. What's a Nazi to you? And she said, she said, a Nazi is a white supremacist. And I said, so you define a Nazi as a white supremacist? That is the sole definition? I have watched BLM activists literally tell someone that asking them to protest peacefully makes them a white supremacist. So do people who say that fit the definition? And she said, if they are a white supremacist, they are at least sympathetic to and vote alongside Nazis, and therefore deserve to be thought of as such. If you align yourself with bad people, it rubs off on you. One bad apple spoils the bunch. And I said, okay, but herein lies the problem. Even moderate Republicans are being called Nazis. I got called an anti-Semite for literally no reason, having not said anything about Jews at all in this conversation moments ago. People are being called white supremacists just for suggesting they don't support rioting or looting. The Inquisition and witch hunt mindset is far too loose in its definition of what these enemy groups are. Parler is not a Nazi flag. It was a medium that literally anyone can use, including communists, socialists, democratic socialists, etc. You said that mediums should not allow the inciting of violence. Okay, the problem is the movements in question seem to be very selective about what violence they would like opposed. And Victoria says, moderate Republicans align themselves with Nazis. They are Nazi sympathizers and should be treated as such. No one who used Parler except Nazis, or rather, no one used Parler except Nazis. That's the whole joke amongst not Nazis. If you're not a Nazi, you aren't infamous for using Parler. And then I said, I basically quoted her back. So moderate Republicans align themselves with Nazis. They are Nazi sympathizers and should be treated as such. That's what she said. And I said, yeah, this is the slippery slope. You're literally doing exactly what I am trying to say is happening. Are all Republicans Nazis? And then she said that thing about no one used Parler except Nazis. And I said, so nobody used Parler except Nazis? So literally everyone on Parler is a Nazi. And then she says, if you give a free pass to Nazis, you are just as dangerous as actual Nazis. And and then she said, yes, if so you or anyone you know find yourself in that same group, you better take a second look at yourself. And then I said, so on the opposing side of things, there are people on the right who feel everyone who advocates for, say, free college is a communist and is therefore in league with Stalinists and should be silenced. Is this acceptable? And she goes, no, because authoritarianism is always on the right, and these people don't know what they are talking about. And I said, authoritarianism is always on the right? So Stalin was on the right? Mao? Both of them were on the right? And she goes, well, they were classified as communism, but were they really? They were more authoritarian dictators and less a mutual group of individuals working towards a common goal. You know, we get into a conversation here about what authoritarians and communists and such are, and I kind of make the distinction that there's authoritarian to libertarian, and then there's communist or capitalist. Communism and capitalism are economic systems. Authoritarian or libertarian is a separate issue. And I deal with people on both the right and the left who have this problem. There are people who believe that all communism, or rather, like somebody said, censorship, this will lead to communism, as if authoritarianism is directly inbred into communism. And then there are people on the other side that say the same thing, that capitalism and fascism are the same thing, you know, and that, but the problem is that both sides of it both seem to think that they're both the ones that are not authoritarian. You know, communists aren't authoritarians. You know, only fascists are authoritarians, and it just doesn't work. You know, so I basically, after going through all of that, and gave her some examples of different communities that could be that way. But so she said that I said a society can decide how far on the libertarian versus authoritarian scale they want to go, but if it's done against the will of the people in your community, you have stepped into authoritarianism, and you have to be careful about where that leads. I gave the example, Christian theocrats, for example, argue that the Constitution was written by Christian men and therefore our government is a theocracy, which is why they feel that anything that violates Christian ideals is unconstitutional. I gave an example of that, you know, basically is that people lost that argument, and that's the reason why we were allowed to change the law in a way that doesn't necessarily always uphold the Bible. But anyway, she goes, it's not against the will of the people. Giving Parler a platform is against the will of the people. I said, you just identified the group that agrees with you as the will of the people, even though there is a large portion of the population that does not agree with you. And then she said, the people want there not to be a platform that allows dipshits to plan the end of our democracy. How are you not understanding this? And then she goes, more people are on my side. That's why voting is important. If you want something different, convince people to vote for you. And I said, the people, in quotes, as a whole, all of the people. In the history of the United States, there have been times when the House, the Senate, and the presidency were entirely Republican. If that were to happen again and they would say, make abortion illegal again, would that be the people? And she goes, yeah, except it won't ever happen again because we won't grow complacent like my parents' generation did. My generation will also work to dismantle this white supremacist, Eurocentrist culture that rewards narcissistic sociopaths. And I said, so we should write our government system under the pretense that we only know that only. All right, I'm sorry, let me start over. So we should write our government system under the pretense that we know only politicians who represent our interests will ever be elected. You feel safe with that? Trump was elected and nobody said that could happen just 4 years ago. And she assures me, but we won't get there if we are wasting our time arguing about whether or not Parler should lose its privileges. They absolutely should. Those idiots should be thrown back into the deepest corners of the dark web. She said we need to dismantle the winner-take-all system and move to ranked choice voting, which I don't disagree with. But I said, but you are not grasping the importance of what I am saying. So when you are talking about government systems, you have multiple ways that tyranny and authoritarianism can take root. You have to have fail-safes in place, and public opinion is not a good fail-safe. Ask the people of Germany about that. People who oppose democracy as mob rule do correctly point out that there are instances when a majority can become tyrannical. For example, the majority of people in Germany were duped into no longer valuing the individual rights of Jews. On the opposite side, sometimes the majority can do something good that a minority doesn't like. So say, for example, the ballot initiatives that legalized gay marriage. The way to guard against this is you have to have constitutional rights that a majority cannot simply wave away. The Bill of Rights locked in these rights so that even if there was a fascist majority at some point, they can't just tell you that you are not allowed to speak out against it. So, and then this is another thing that's been really funny about these debates I've been having, but she's like, the conservatives already fought this case and won when they decided a bakery doesn't have to sell a cake to a gay couple. So, over the course of my debates about this, I've had two different really interesting arguments given to me. One of them was them bringing up the example of the gay couple that was able to force a bakery to make their wedding cake. And they're now basically defending their position by using this bigoted example of behavior. And then I had some other guy who was interesting. He literally said, well, Citizens United says that these companies are people and they have a right to free speech, so therefore they have the right to censor this. So now I have leftists that are literally defending their position using the bigoted people who wouldn't make cake for gay people, and Citizens United, which is literally the ruling that allows our companies to rule our country inadvertently through plutocracy. They're using those two things to defend their position, and they don't realize just how ridiculous that is. So eventually she just keeps saying, well, this isn't the government doing it, so therefore it's not censorship. And I said, so if the government shut down Parler, then would that not be okay? And she's like, well, that's not the conversation. The government didn't do it. The private business owners did. She was apparently not aware that they were trying to shut Parler all the way down. But in any case, this kind of brings you to the points that I'm getting at, is that the reason why she feels confident that everything will be fine is because we won, and she is 100% confident that the pendulum will never switch in the other direction again. So therefore, it's completely acceptable for her to advocate for total authoritarian censorship, because what do they have to worry about? And then she tells me that I don't understand history. Well, there's some real short-sightedness going on, but it's not just about the issue of even things that happened back in Nazi Germany. It's about even just things that happened in 2008. So, for example, I don't know why CNN's website doesn't load good for this article, but this is an article back from when the Dixie Chicks, a female country music group, spoke out against George Bush and the war. And a lot of radio stations pulled their music off, and they were being boycotted by people. Boycotting is fine, but literally the companies were responding by censoring the Dixie Chicks music because of comments that were made about George Bush. George Bush was a bastard, and if you're concerned about fascism, that's the real fascist you should be concerned about, since he brought about the Patriot Act, which is probably the most fascist part of our current law. And so this is an example of what I'm talking about, is that they don't have a sense of history of understanding that we can't depend on the idea that it's okay to set these precedents because we're always going to be in charge. That's actually always how authoritarian dictatorships get started. And people don't recognize that this is the slippery slope I'm talking about. That is that essentially, if you're not careful, any precedent that you set will be turned against you if the other group is in charge. But it seems to me that they're simply naive enough to believe that we'll just always be in charge, so we don't have to worry about it. And when people say that leftists, for example, would never do anything as ridiculous as try to ban books, I was on Twitter, and apparently Antifa in Portland is showing up at bookstores and demanding that they take Andy Ngo's book out of their bookstore, and that they're going to continue to try to threaten the store owners. And this store actually had to evacuate because Antifa came to their door demanding that they not carry Andy Ngo's book.
We will shut down the store. We will shut down the store every day. You will lose money every day. Every day that you sell his book. we will shut down the stores.
So the police eventually responded to that, but the idea that they would never, ban books or demand that certain books be banned, it's just ridiculous. It's horseshit. And you can't trust human beings with this kind of power. It never goes well. And, it's also not effective. Like, to those of you who are thinking that this is just going to work, the reality is what this is going to do is make extremists dig in further. It's just going to make them go underground a little bit. But this kind of brings me to the same problem that I've been having all year long, trying to debate people philosophically about the approach of the left when it comes to speaking to the right. And I was on one Facebook group because a BLM chapter was started here in a town right next to mine, which is a little tiny town that has no violence, no crime, and really not any racism either. But I brought up the work of guys like Daryl Davis, who manages to bring people back from the Ku Klux Klan and essentially rescue them from the cult that is the Ku Klux Klan. And they said, well, I don't want to do this. I'm not interested in convincing people. I don't want to make them afraid. I want to make racists afraid, and they don't, I get kind of where they're going with it, but it doesn't work like that. If you make people afraid, that's actually what leads to more hatred. In fact, at the core of most racism is people being afraid of people that are different than them. That's why it doesn't work. So, in another kind of bizarre twist, an Idaho internet company is now censoring Facebook and Twitter in response to their feedback, because customers are calling them and saying, we don't want these websites to be accessible via our internet providers because they're engaging in censorship and we don't want our kids using them. So again, I'm sure that those same people are not going to, who said earlier that, well, a private company can do whatever they want, wouldn't go along and say, well, that means, of course, that should just be straight across the board. This is the issue, is that what it really comes down to is this. We don't want racism censored. We want racism only against people of color to be censored. We don't want the incitement of violence to be censored. We want the incitement of violence against the people that we like to be censored. It always starts off with the best intentions, but it doesn't end that way. That's really what the problem is. If you're concerned about violence at the Capitol, okay, I agree with you. I oppose all violence for political purposes. I oppose all of it. And that includes, murdering people in the streets of Portland. That includes charging into a cafe and turning people's tables over and throwing chairs at them. And that includes throwing firebombs at police officers. All of it. That's been going on all year long. And it's really interesting to me to read the comments that I've been finding on Twitter that the people who attack the Capitol are all criminals and every single one of them should be rounded up and put in jail. You can't incite violence and all that. It's domestic terrorism. These are literally the words being used by people talking about the MAGA nutcases who attacked the Capitol. Okay? They're literally using the exact same language that has been used about them all year. And if you bring that up, then they just say, well, that's different because our cause is just and their cause is not. Essentially, the ends justify the means. This will not end well.